Shalom, hope all is well. B'ezrat Hashem, we're going to be reviewing the Gemara in Masechet Sanhedrin that we learned this past week. B'ezrat Hashem, we're going to start the review from Daled Amud Aleph, top of the page, and we will learn Daled, Hey, and Vav, finishing off Zayin Amud Aleph towards the top of the page. We're going to have 6 sections in today's review. B'ezrat Hashem, and as we get started, let's just remember we're learning a zechut. It should be a merit for Yaakov ben Dinah. He should be able to experience a quick, speedy recovery, refuah shleima, quickly, soon in our days. The Gemara we're going to pick up with on Daled Amud Aleph is actually in the middle of a discussion. So let's just remember where we're picking up with so that we're all on the same page. The Gemara here is discussing a machloket, Rebbe and the Rabbanan. We had a braita towards the bottom of Gimel Amud Bet. How many judges are needed for monetary cases? The Tanakama or the Rabbanan say 3, and Rebbe says 5. So the Gemara went through 2 attempted answers to resolve what the machloket was based on, and then it gave a third answer, which was a second answer, which we left off with last week. The bottom of Gimel Amud Bet, the top of Daled Amud Aleph, and this second answer to explain the machloket was that it's actually contingent on a drasha. The pasuk says, in regards to monetary cases, it's actually written in the Parsha of Shomrim, Sher Yarshi'un Elohim. The word Yarshi'un, if you follow the Mikra, the way it's pronounced, which is what Rebbe does, it's plural. And then it would say, just as Yarshi'un is plural, Elohim is plural. And then we compare one Elohim to the other, which would give you a total of 4. You can have a court case of 4, so therefore you have to tack on another one, which is why you have 5. However, the Rabbanan follow Yesh Em L'Masoret. You follow traditionally the way that it is written, and there's no Vav in the Torah. Yarshi'un is written without a Vav, so it could be read Yarshi'an. Based on that, Yesh Em L'Masoret, you'd say, actually, the Elohim that's connected to Yarshi'an is 1. The Elohim before is 1, which is a total of 2, plus 1 more is going to be a total of 3. This was the second way to understand the Machloket Rebbe and the Rabbanan. And what we're picking up with in Daled Amud Aleph now, Rabbi Yitzchak Bar Yosef adds on to this, this explanation of Rebbe and the Rabbanan with 4 more Tanaim that seem to hold of this principle of Yesh Em L'Mikra, and at this point we're going to say, really, this is indeed a machloket about Yesh Em L'Mikra or Mesoret. So let's see. Amar Rabbi Yitzchak Bar Yosef, top line in Daled Amud Aleph. Amar Rabbi Yitzchak Bar Yosef, Amar Rabbi Yochanan. Rebbe, 1. Rabbi Yehuda ben Roetz, 2. Ubed Shammai, 3. Rabbi Shimon, Rabbi Akiva, 5 Tanaim, Kul U'Sfir Lahu, they all hold Yesh Em L'Mikra, that the way we expound verses is how it's pronounced, how it's read, and not the way it could be read based on the way it's written. So let's see. Rebbe Hada Amaran. Rebbe, as you just explained in the second answer, is that it says Yarshi'un, even though it's written without a Vav, you read it plural, making Elohim plural, 2 plus 2 is 4, making there be a total of 5 judges in civil cases. Rabbi Yehuda ben Roetz, the Tanya. Now, what is the shita of Rabbi Yehuda ben Roetz that holds Yesh Em L'Mikra? The Tanya, as the Braita teaches us, Sha'alu Talmidim et Rabbi Yehuda ben Roetz. The students asked Rabbi Yehuda ben Roetz, Ekra ani shiv'im. The pasuk tells us by a woman who just gave birth that she's tmeya for shvu'ayim, for 2 weeks, 14 days. But I could read it shiv'im because it doesn't say, there's no vav there that clearly makes it shvu'ayim. So maybe she should be tmeya for 70 days. Maybe a woman who gave birth to a girl is tmeya for 70 days. So Marlahen, Rabbi Yehuda ben Roetz responded, there's a comparison. We have the days that are considered Yemei Tum'ah, and there's the days that follow that are considered the days of Ta'ara by a male, meaning when she gives birth to a male, which we know is 7 plus 33. And we know there's also the days of Tumah and Ta'ara regarding giving birth to a girl. Now the days of Ta'ara b'nekeva is 66, but Ma keshetiher b'zachar, just as when it comes to the days of Ta'ara, of having a male child, which is 33. Bin keva kiflayim, when she gives birth to a girl, it's double the days of Ta'ara that follow, which is 66. Af kishatimei b'zachar, so too, regarding the days of tum'ah, the initial stage of tum'ah of a male, bin keva kiflayim, it should be double regarding whatever it is in a female. Meaning that since the zachar, she has 7 days, as we know the Torah says clearly, she's tmeya, so we could assume that it's not shiv'im, but rather it's shvu'ayim, that it's 14, which is double the days of tum'ah of the situation when she has a boy. But when the students left, this Rabbi Yehuda ben Roetz ran after them. Amar lahen, and he said to them, you don't have to come on to this type of an explanation. It's not necessary. Because the pasuk says, Shvu'ayim karinan. It's read Shvu'ayim v'yesh em lemikra. And we have the capacity to darshan. We expound verses based on the way it's read, not on the way it's written. So we see that Rabbi Yehuda ben Roetz was comfortable saying, yesh em lemikra. It says, it might be read shiv'im, it could be read, but the way we read it traditionally is shivu'ayim. Even though it's written in a way that could be read shiv'im, you disregard it because yesh em lemikra. So says Rabbi Yitzchak Bar Yosef, this is the second opinion who holds of the position of yesh em lemikra. Bet Shammai, now where do we find Bet Shammai hold yesh em lemikra? The Tanan, it's a Mishnah in Masechet Pesachim. The Mishnah says like this. We know that there's different types of korbanot, and the blood is sprinkled, as we'll see, some types of korbanot, let's say, we said, Olah, Shlamim, Asham, those are sprinkled below the red line. And also, these korbanot, there's 2 applications in the corners that are 4 because it separates in the corners. As opposed to the korban chatat, it's sprinkled above the red line, and there's actually 4 applications. So the Mishnah there says as follows, Bet Shammai Omrim, any blood that is sprinkled on the outer mizbeach, meaning the mizbeach that's in the azara, the courtyard outside. So really, if you are supposed to put 2 applications, and instead he did 1 application, kiper, it's sufficient. There's a kapara that's received. Like the pasuk tells us, it says, the blood of your offerings he shall pour. And that's a singular language, so that implies that even if you just did 1 and you were supposed to do 2, it's still sufficient. But regarding the korban chatat, where you're supposed to do 4 applications of blood, shtei matanot, if he did 2 applications, that would be yotzei, you get a kapara. Beit Hillel say more leniently, even regarding the chatat, if he did 1 application, kiper, it's also sufficient. And Rav Huna said, why does Beit Shammai say you need 2 applications? In order to be yotzei, the zrikat adam, the sprinkling of the blood of a chatat, again, l'chatchila you're supposed to do 4. Why does he say, Beit Shammai say 2 is sufficient? Because the pasuk says karnot, karnot, karnot. It says the word karnot 3 times in regards to sprinkling the blood of the korban chatat. Karnot are the corners, the horns literally of the mizbeach, the corners. And since Beit Shammai hold yesh em lemikra, as we're going to assume now, so they're read plural, and therefore that would be a total of 6 applications. Harekan shesh, 6. So what is the 6 used for? Arba mitzvah. 4 of them are used to teach us that lechatchila you're supposed to do 4. V'shtayim la'akev, but 2 are there to teach us that as long as you did 2, b'diavad you're yotzei. Beit Hillel say karnot, karnat, karnat. Since they hold yesh em lemasoret, and there's no vav in the latter 2 examples, so therefore there's actually a total of 4. Harekan arba. So the total of 4 tells you gimel mitzvah. Then in order to be yotzei lechatchila, to be ideally yotzei, you should do 3 more, meaning 3 in addition to the 1, which is a total of 4 applications. But the one of them that's there is to teach us that as long as you did 1 application, you're yotzei. Asks the Gemara, ve'emakul mitzvah. But maybe I'll say that since you need all 4 to teach us the lechatchila, you need to do 4 applications. So maybe you don't even need to do any to be yotzei. So the Gemara answers, kapara b'chti lo ashkachen. It's impossible that you can't have an atonement without any sort of an application. And since the rikat adam, the sprinkling of the blood, creates the atonement, therefore that's obviously not a logical conclusion. But the bottom line is we've shown that Beit Shammai holds yesh em lemikra. Continues the Gemara, 4th Tana. Rabbi Shimon de Tanya. Where do we find Rabbi Shimon holds yesh em lemikra? As the Braita teaches, this is the Braita in Masechet Sukkah. Shtayim kil chatan mishlishit afilu tefach. The Tanakama says 2 walls of a sukkah have to be full length, 7 tefachim, and the third could be even just 1 tefach. Rabbi Shimon says shalosh kilo chatan berevi'it afilu tefach. Rabbi Shimon says 3 of them could be a full length, and the 4th could be even a tefach. What's the basis of debate? Rabbanan Tzvira, the Rabbanan hold yesh em lemesoret, that you expound the verses as they're read and not written. Rabbi Shimon savar yesh em lemikra, and Rabbi Shimon holds you expound it as it's read. Rabbanan savar yesh em lemesoret, the Rabbanan say as follows. Basukot, basukot, basukot. So it says the word 3 times. 2 of them are without a vav, which would be singular, could be read basukat, and the 3rd is with a vav, which would mean harei kan arba. You have a total of 4, which would imply you need 4 walls for a sukkah. But dal achad kra legufei. 1 is removed, like we learned earlier. You can't expound the initial one, pashu tlat. So therefore you're left with 3. Now we have halacha Moshe Sinai that teaches us that the 3rd wall doesn't have to be a full 3rd wall, but it could be even a tefach. Thus, you're left with 2 and a tefach. Rabbi Shimon holds basukot, basukot, basukot. He expounds lemikra, and therefore they're read plurally, so that's actually a total of 6. Harei kan sheish, that's 6. Dal chad kra legufei, remove 1 for itself. You can't expound the first one. Pashulahu arba, so you're left with the last 2 words, which is 4. And the halacha Moshe Sinai teaches us that the last wall is not 4 total, but it's 3 plus a tefach. That was the 4th example of Yeshem Lemikra. And the 5th, Rabbi Akiva the Tanya, is the Braita teacher. Rabbi Akiva Omer, Minayin l'revi'it dam sheyatz'a mishnei meitim. We know what the halacha is if you have a revi'it of blood, a revi'it alug, a certain amount of volume of blood of a dead body that's under an ohel hamet, under some sort of an enclosure, and somebody's in there, he's tameh. Rabbi Akiva adds on to that. He says, even if it emerges from 2 different dead bodies and it combines to form a revi'it, shemetameh be'oil, would cause contamination in an enclosure. Shene'emar, like it says, hakol nafshot meit lo yavo. So nafshot is plural, and the way he expounds it is, shtei nefashot v'shior echad. Even if there's 2 bodies that produce 1 measure of a revi'it, that would be enough to cause tum'ah be'ohel. For Rabbanan, the Rabbanan say it's without a vav, so nafshat ktiv, therefore it could be read as a singular, and therefore there's no drasha to be made, only 1 body that produces a revi'it, not 2. Matkifla Rav Acha bar Yaakov. Rav Acha bar Yaakov refutes this entire approach because he says, is there anyone who disagrees? All the opinions that you're saying would disagree, like Beit Hillel, for example, the Rabbanan we just said, all these shitot. Is there anyone who doesn't hold Yeshem Lemikra? But we know the Braita teaches the source that you're not allowed to eat milk and meat together. The Braita says, it says you shall not cook. It says you shall not cook meat in the mother's milk. Kid in its mother's milk. Now, Yachol b'chelev, you might think that it means not to cook meat in chelev. Chelev is fat. Maybe it's not milk altogether. Turning to Dalet Amud Bet, Amrit yesh em lemikra, but we say no because yesh em lemikra. The way we know to traditionally read it is b'chalev, not b'chelev, and therefore says the Gemara, that's the source that you're not allowed to cook and eat milk and meat together. But clearly you see everybody agrees to Yeshem Lemikra. So you can't explain that the Machloket, Rebbe and the Rabbanan and all these subsequent debates is based on this Machloket because clearly everyone agrees Yeshem Lemikra. Ella, so the Gemara says a 3rd way to explain the Machloket, Rebbe and the Rabbanan. Everybody agrees Yeshem Lemikra, but Rebbe Rabbanan ba'kamiflagi. And the debate Rebbe and the Rabbanan is as follows. Rebbe Savar Yarshi'un Elohim, that the way you read the verse is like this. It says that the judges shall make guilty. Yarshi'un Elohim. Now what is that referring to? Achrini. It means there's another 2 that shall make guilty, which means the first 2 in the verse, Elohim, is 2, based on the fact that the last Elohim is 2, which is based on Yarshi'un being plural. So 2 plus 2 is 4, which means you'd have a total of 5 because you can't have an even number of judges. Rabbanan Savri and the Rabbanan hold Yarshi'un deha'ech v'hai. When it says Yarshi'un, it means that one and this one, which means if you add 1, the first Elohim, with the second Elohim, so Yarshi'un, they together are 2, and they shall indict a person, make him guilty, but that means not 2, but 3 really, that's not going to be a total of 5. But they both agree, Yesh em lemikra. Let's continue now in these different opinions. Rabbi Yehuda ben Roetz lo pligi Rabbanan alei. Rabbi Yehuda ben Roetz is no question because the way Shavuayim is pronounced, actually, everybody agrees that's how you expound it. And a woman is tmeya for 14 days. Her yemei tumah after giving birth to a girl. But now Beit Hillel and Beit Shammai. Beit Hillel said that the way you read the verses before Karnot, it seems to be that it refers to 4, which seems to be Yeshem L'Masoret. So how do we explain Beit Hillel also holds Yeshem L'Mikra? Beit Hillel, the Tanya, like the Braita teaches, he has an alternative source. V'kiper, v'kiper, v'kiper. It says 3 times that there's an atonement had for a Korban Chatat. Mipnei adin. Now, this is necessary. We'll see what this means in a moment, but it's necessary to teach us this 3 times because of a logical debate. V'halo dinhu, because logically one could argue and say the following. Ne'emar damim lemata v'ne'emar damim lemala. It says damim below when it's referring to korban chatat. One second. Sorry, one second. Meaning, in the psukim we find, in the psukim we find that the word below, meaning when you sprinkle the blood below the chut hasikra, below the red line, for those korbanot, it uses the word damim, blood. And we know that those korbanot, actually as we're about to see, b'diavad at least, if you sprinkle one time, you're yotzeh. And it also says the word damim regarding a korban chatat which is sprinkled above the chut hasikra. Ma damim ha'amur lemata. Just as the bloods that are sprinkled below the chut hasikra, meaning the other korbanot, shlamim, asham, those other korbanot, shenatnam matana achat kiper, one sprinkling is sufficient. B'diavad, af damim ha'amurim lemala, shenatnan matana achat kiper. So too, regarding the bloods that are sprinkled above, i.e. korban chatat, maybe one should be sufficient, and you shouldn't need extra jashot just based on a comparison. It should be sufficient. I'll tell you why that you need v'kiper, because there's a different argument that could be made. Ne'emar damim b'chutz v'ne'emar damim b'fnim. It says that the word damim regarding korbanot that are on the chatat that are sprinkled in the outer mizbeach, and it also says regarding those that are sprinkled in the inner mizbeach, which are inside of the mishkan or the Beit HaMikdash. Ma damim ha'amurim b'fnim, just as the bloods of the chataot that are sprinkled inside. Chiser achat mimatanot. If you miss one of the 4, lo asav lo klum, you're not yotzeh. Af damim ha'amurim b'chutz. So maybe the chataot that are sprinkled outside, which are the regular ones we're talking about, chiser achat mimatanot lo asav lo klum, lo asa klum. Maybe you shouldn't be yotzeh. So the Braita continues, Nira lemi dome. So let's analyze which one it's more comparable to, meaning the regular chatat that's brought outside. Danin chutz michutz ve'ein danin chutz mifnim. So one could argue and say you should compare the korbanot that are brought in the outer mizbeach to those that are brought in the outer mizbeach. And just as you'd be yotzei sprinkling one time those korbanot like the shlamim that are sprinkled below the red line outside, so the chatat that's sprinkled above the red line should also be yotzei. So you shouldn't need special verses. Or maybe look at it the other way. Danin chatat v'daled karnot mechatat v'arba karnot. Maybe you should expound the chatat and 4 corners, meaning where it requires 4 sprinklings, lechatchila at least, from the other chatat that requires 4 sprinklings, i.e. the inner one. And then you should say, just as the inner one requires 4, even b'diavad to be yotzei, so to the outer korban chatat you require 4 sprinklings. And don't compare it to the shlamim, which is not a chatat and doesn't have 4 sprinklings. Talmud Lomar, therefore the Braita concludes, v'kiper. Because of this logical debate, you need these drashot. Now, how do we deduce from this? According to Beit Hillel, 1 sprinkling is sufficient for the chatat, like this. Kiper, when it comes to the chatat, atonement is felt even if you don't do 4 and you only do 3. And the next kiper is kiper even if you only had 2. And the final kiper, the third kiper even if there was only 1. So we've shown how the third debate, Beit Shammai and Beit Hillel, is not contingent on Yeshem Lemekra Mesoret, but they both agree Mesoret. Beit Hillel has alternative psukim that tell us 1 sprinkle will be sufficient for a korban chatat. Let's move on to the fourth debate now. Rabbi Shimon v'Rabbanan ba'pligi. So Rabbi Shimon and the Rabbanan, they were arguing about how many walls you need for a sukkah, 2 and a tefach or 3 and a tefach. So how do we explain it? Like this. Rabbi Shimon savar eschacha lo ba'ikra. Rabbi Shimon holds you don't need to use one of those sukkot to teach us the concept of having a roof, of the schach. So therefore they're all there, as we explained, and you have 3 plus a tefach, because the Halacha Moshe Sinai says the fourth could be a tefach. For Rabbanan savri schacha ba'ikra, the Rabbanan say you need to use one of those words sukkot for the fact that you need schach, and therefore you only have 3 in total for the walls, which is 2 and even a tefach. And finally, Rabbi Akiva v'Rabbanan ba'pligi. What is the debate Rabbi Akiva the Rabbanan regarding if 2 bodies produce a revi'it, if it creates contamination by oil or not? So Rabbi Akiva savar nafshot tarti mashma. Rabbi Akiva says nafshot implies 2 bodies, meaning if you have 2 bodies, they produce a revi'it of dam. So then the halacha is it could contaminate. For Rabbanan savar, the Rabbanan disagree. They say nafshot alma mashma. It doesn't mean 2 bodies. It just means whenever there are bodies, it's talking about in general. Then there could be contamination, but it would have to be a revi'it of blood from 1 body, as we explained before. So bottom line is, we've shown in this third attempted answer is everyone really agrees Yeshem Lemikra. And as we went through each one, each debate is explained within that position. Asks the Gemara, does everybody really hold Yeshem Lemikra? Tanya, we have a Braita that teaches like this. Regarding Tefillin Shel Rosh. We know that Tefillin Shel Rosh have 4 different sections where the parshiot would go into. And the psukim say, letotafot, letotafot, letotafot. So 2 times it's without a vav, and 1 time it's with a vav. Harekan arba, so Divrei Bishmol says, this is the source that you have 4 sections because 1 is plural and 2 are singular. Now clearly, this is using the svara, or the way to darshan of Yeshem L'Masoret, because if you say L'Mikra, so then they're all read plural. So it must be the fact you read the first 2 letotafot, but letotefet, which is singular, implies he darshans Yeshem L'Masoret. Rabbi Akiva Omer, no tzarich. You don't need those drashot, he says, because tat bekafti ishtayim, pat ba'afriki ishtayim. So the word tat and pat are 2 in these different languages, and therefore you know that there's 4. But the bottom line is, we see clearly Rabbi Yishmael holds Yeshem L'Masoret. Ela, the Gemara tries again, really back to the second answer. Olam pligi, really they do debate Yeshem L'Mikra v'Yeshem L'Masoret. V'hani miliki pligi echad nikra me'Masoret. When is there a debate if the way it's read and the way it's written are distinct from each other? Aval hai chalev v'chelev t'chiadadinenu. But regarding chalev and chelev, it's written and read the same. So there Yeshem L'Mikra. Everybody would agree that Yeshem L'Mikra. Problem is Varei yir'eh yera'eh. It says regarding the mitzvah of going to the Beit HaMikdash and also bring korban olah on the regalim and the 3 holidays, festivals. The pasuk says yera'eh, but it could be read yir'eh, and really it's read and written the same, and yet we expound the Mesoret nonetheless. How do I know that? Upligi, the Tanya, as the Braita teaches in Masechet Chagiga, Yochanan ben Davai Omer, Mishum Rabbi Yehuda ben Tema, Hasuma ba'achat me'enav. If somebody's blind in one eye, Patur min ha're'iyah is exempt from going up to the Beit HaMikdash to be seen. Shene'emar, like the pasuk says, yir'eh, yera'eh. So we expound it as follows. Kederech shaba lir'ot, just as HaKadosh Baruch Hu comes to see you, kach ba lir'ot, so too he comes to be seen by you, i.e., which is the Mesoret actually, which is yir'eh, meaning you go yir'eh. Kach ba lir'ot, right, lir'ot. So too he comes to be seen, which is yir'eh, which is he sees, meaning the person who comes to see Hashem, i.e. Hashem is being seen by you. Ma lir'ot b'shtei einav, just as Hashem comes to see with his 2 eyes, af lir'ot b'shtei einav, so to the person who is seeing Hashem needs to come with both eyes, which is an exemption for someone that's blind in one eye. But clearly you see, the Mesoret and the Mikra is the same, and we expound the Mesoret. Ella, so the Gemara says the fifth and final explanation. Amar Ravach, Bereder Rav Ika, Amar Kra. Really, we're going to say is in general, there is a machloket Yeshem Mekra Mesoret across the board, no question. However, how do we explain then the Isra Basar B'chalav? We know it's in milk and not fat. Lo Tevashel Gedi, because it says the word Bishul. It says Bishul. We know Bishul is cooking in a liquid. Derech Bishul Asrat Torah, the Torah is prohibiting something that's cooking, and cooking in fat is not called cooking, but rather that would be called tigun, that would be called frying. So therefore, the fact that it says Bishul, we know it's milk and not fat. But the point is, in general, there could be a debate, even where the words are read and written the same, and we're going to explain the machloket Rebbe and the Rabbanan, that it's Mesoret Mikra machloket, as well as those other places that we found the same related debates. Let's move on now to the second section. Tan Rabbanan. Says the Braita, Dine Mamonot Bishlosha. So the Braita says the Chatchili should have 3 judges adjudicating cases of money. Turning to Hamud Aleph, and if there was a person who was known far and wide as a professional, Dan Afilu Yechidi. Now Rashi points out over here, we're not talking about, 1 second. No, sorry, forget what I just said. But if he's Mumchel Rabim, which we're going to see, it doesn't mean necessarily that he has smicha, but even if he's just a professional, he knows how to expound, to darshan, he knows how to judge properly, dan afilu yechidi, so then he could adjudicate cases of loans even as an individual. Amar Rav Nachman said, Kegon ana dan dine nefashot dine mamonot b'yechidi. I, says Rav Nachman, was allowed to expound monetary cases, again referring to loans, as an individual. V'chein Amar Rav Chia, Kegon ana dan dine mamonot b'yechidi. Rav Chia said also, I in Eretz Yisrael was allowed to expound monetary cases, again loans, as an individual. The Gemara wonders, when Rav Chia and Rav Nachman were saying I as an example, is it because they had studied and they also had the intellect to logically calculate cases, but v'nakitna reshuta, also they had permission from the Nasi or the Reish Galuta, who was the head of their jurisdiction or of their domain, that area. Avalona kit reshuta, but if they would not have had permission, dine lo dina, they would not be allowed to judge, and it wouldn't be sufficient, it wouldn't be an effective judgment. Or Dilmor, perhaps afal gav delona kit reshuta, even if they don't ask permission, dine dina, just having the mental acuity and study, they would be already allowed to judge as individuals. So Tashma, the Gemara tells us the source from a Praita, the Marzutra Breder of Nachman dan dina, this fellow Marzutra Breder of Nachman, he adjudicated a case. V'ta'a, he made a mistake. Atalek Amid Rav Yosef, again to Rav Yosef. Amalei Rav Yosef said, Im kiblu chalayu lo tishalem. If the litigants accepted whatever the outcome was, then you would not be responsible to pay for the loss that you made, the mistake that you made. V'ilo, but if not, zil shlim, you would have to pay. So Shema, what do we see clearly? Kilo nakit reshuta, that even if they're not granted permission, dine dina, it still would be a binding a case, because this fellow, Marzutra Breder of Nachman, had not received permission, because had he received permission from the Nasir, the Reish Galuta, he would be exempt. So the fact that it's effective, but he has to pay back, Shema Mina, that shows us that they could still judge if they want to, but again, they wouldn't be backed up. They wouldn't have immunity if they make a mistake. Amar Rav says, Hayman debai lemeidan dina, he gives good advice. He says, if somebody wants to judge, based on what we just said, he wants to be exempt if he makes a mistake, even though you don't need to, but just ask permission. And Shmuel said the same thing. Have permission from the head of the or exilarch, meaning the head of the rabbi who was the head of the Jews in Bavel, because then you'll have immunity. Now the Gemara explains like this. Pshita, it's obvious. If somebody gets a reshut to judge in Bavel, any judges in Bavel, or me'atam la'atam, if he has permission to judge in Eretz Yisrael from the Nasi, any judges there, and similarly, if he has permission to adjudicate in Bavel, and he judges in Eretz Yisrael, mahani, that would be effective. The power of permission to judge in Bavel, it extends also to Eretz Yisrael. Why? Because in Bavel, the Jews and the permission of the leadership from Shevet Yehuda, the Reish Galuta, is called the scepter, and there in Eretz Yisrael, it's called mechokek, which is the legislator, which is a lesser significance in terms of judgment. Kedetani, like the Braita teaches, it says regarding the bracha of Yehuda at the end of Moshe Rabbeinu's life, Yaakov Avinu's life, Lo Yasser Shevet Yehuda, the scepter shall never leave Yehuda, Elu Rashei Galuyot shebeBavel sherodinat Yisrael bashevet, refers to the head of the Jews, the Reish Galuta in Bavel, that would rule the Jewish people with a scepter. Umechokek mebein raglav, and the legislator from between his legs of Yehuda, Elu b'nei banav shel Hillel shemelamdim Torah b'rabim, the grandchildren of Bavel who taught Torah in public in Eretz Yisrael. But the point is, that's more significant. But the question we have is, me'atam la'achamai, what if someone has permission to judge from Eretz Yisrael? Does it extend also to Bavel? That he'll be immune if he makes a mistake. So Tashma, the Gemara tells us a story which we'll elaborate on turning to the next page, God willing. The Rabba Bar Chana Dandina. We know Rabba Bar Chana adjudicated cases in Bavel, and he had received smicha from, we'll see later, Rebbe in Eretz Yisrael. V'tai made a mistake. Atala kamed Rabbi Chia, went to front of Rabbi Chia. Amarlei said, "Ikiblu chalayu." If the people, the litigants, accepted the outcome beforehand, lo tishalem, you wouldn't be responsible. V'ilo, but if they don't, zil shlim, you have to go and pay. So you see clearly, Rabba Bar Chana reshutav anakit. Rabba Bar Chana had permission from the Nasi in Eretz Yisrael from Rebbe. Shma mina me'atam la'acha lo mahani. So it didn't cover him because he was now in Bavel. Shma mina, that's a good proof that the immunity does not extend from Eretz Yisrael to Bavel. Asks the Gemara, "V'lo mahani, is it not effective?" V'harabba bar Rav Huna, have a minsi v'hadei dveresh galuta. Rabba bar Rav Huna, who had received the permission to judge from the Nasi in Eretz Yisrael, when he would argue with the Reish Galuta in Bavel, Amar would say, "Lav minaycho nakitna reshuta." I don't need your permission. Nakitna reshuta me Abba Mari. I have permission from my father, my master. Abba Mari me Rav. My father, my master from Rav. V'Rav me Rabbi Chia. Rav had permission from Rabbi Chia. Rabbi Chia me Rebbe, and Rabbi Chia had permission from Rebbe. So you see clearly that the permission granted in Eretz Yisrael does cover in Bavel. The Gemara answers, he was trying to stop the arguments of the rabbis in Bavel with words in general, but really it wouldn't cover. Actually, this Rabbi Bar Rav Huna had permission also to judge in Bavel from Reish Galuta. It was just trying to show that he didn't need his permission. Asks the Gemara, but if it's really not effective, so Rabba Bar Chana Reshuta Denakat Lamali, as we'll see later, why did Rabba Bar Chana even ask permission to judge in Bavel from Eretz Yisrael if it's not going to help him? So the Gemara answers, because there's cities that are on the border of Bavel. There's cities of Bavel that are on the border of Eretz Yisrael. So for those cities, he actually could adjudicate and be immune if he makes a mistake, because those are deemed part of Eretz Yisrael. My reshuta. So the Gemara tells us what was the permission that he had asked to be allowed to judge. What is the story here? It's Rabba Bar Chana. The Gemara answers, Ki havanachit Rabba Bar Chana leBavel. Rabba Bar Chana wanted to go down to Bavel from Eretz Yisrael. So Amar le Rabbi Chia le Rebbe. Rabbi Chia, who we'll see as his uncle, said to Rebbe, who was the Nasi, Ben achi yored leBavel. The son of my brother is going to Bavel. Chana was his brother, and he said, the son of my brother, my nephew, Rabba Bar Chana, is going to Bavel. Yore. So he asked Rebbe, could he adjudicate cases of Yisur v'heter, prohibitory law? And Rebbe said, Yore, he could. Yadin, could he adjudicate cases of money? Yadin, he could. Yatir bechorot, could he permit a bechor, a firstborn, by saying that there's a permanent blemish on it? Yatir, Rebbe said he could. Similarly, when Rav, who was another nephew of this Rabbi Chia, wanted to go down to Bavel, Amar le Rabbi Chia le Rebbe. Rabbi Chia said to Rebbe, Ben achoti yored le Bavel. Again, the son of my sister, he says now, wants to go down to Bavel. Yoreh, could he adjudicate prohibitory law? Yoreh, he said he could. Yadin, could he adjudicate monetary cases? Yadin, he could. Yatir bechorot, but could he permit bechorot by firstborn animals by saying their blemishes? Al yatir. So on this, Rebbe said he cannot. So the Gemara wonders, Ma'ishna lemar de kakari ben achi, or Ma'ishna lemar de kakari ben achoti. Why is it that Rabbi Chia called Rabba Bar Chana the son of my brother, and Rab the son of my sister? Maybe you'll just say that was the reality. The problem is, we know that that's not true, because Mar says, Evo, V'chana, V'shilo, Marta, Rabbi Chia, these five men, Kulu b'nei Abba bar Acha Karsela mi Kafri Havu. They were all sons of Abba bar Acha Karsela from Kafri. So the problem is, you see, we know Chana was one brother and Rabba was his son. Eva was the father of Rav. So clearly, it was the son of Rabbi Chia's brother, not the son of his sisters. The Gemara answers two terutzim. First answer, the Gemara says, is Rav bar Achva dehava bar Achte. Rav was the son of Rabbi Chia's brother as well as the son of his sister. So as we explained, is that this fellow Abba bar Acha Karsela, he had had a first marriage and his wife passed away, which from that marriage he had a son. He had a son. One second. Right. This Ach Abba Bar Acha Karsila, he had two marriages, and then out of the first marriage that he had, there was born a son, which was Evo. He married a woman who already had a daughter from a previous marriage, and then his son Evo married that woman, and they produced Rav, meaning they were not related. That's the point. So the point is that actually, and Rabbi Chia was born in that second union also, l'chara. So the point is, the first answer the Gemara is saying is, actually Rav was a product of both the brother and sister, and therefore it was appropriate to say the son of my sister about Rav, but Rabba Bar Chana Bar Achva Delav Bar Achta, as opposed to Rabba Bar Chana was only the son of his brother, not the son of his sister. Alternatively, you could say a second answer, turning to Hamud Bet, Al Shem Chochmato, that really he called Rav the son of my sister based on Rav's great Chochmah. Like it says in Mishlei, Emor la chokhmah chotiyat, say to chokhmah, you are my sister. So this was a way to show the greatness of Rav. Asks the Gemara, Yatir bechorot al yatir, Rebbe wouldn't give permission for Rav to permit bechorot. My time, what's the reason? Maybe because he wasn't so intelligent. The problem is Hakamrin and the Hakim Tuva, we said Rav was extremely intelligent. Maybe he wasn't proficient in the blemishes. The problem is, Rav himself said, Rav said for 18 months he went to study by the farmers to know which women were permanent and which were not. So clearly he was proficient. Ella, so answer number one, the Gemara says, L'chalek lo kavod Rabba Bar Chana. Rebbe wanted to give honor to Rabba Bar Chana. Meaning to say, is if everyone saw that even Rav didn't get authority to judge the cases of blemishes on firstborn animals, and Rabba Bar Chana did, so then they would give him more kavod. Rabba Bar Chana. Alternatively, Mishum Hagufei, it is actually because of his proficiency that Rebbe didn't want to give him authority to adjudicate those things. The Rab Bekiya b'mumi tfei, because Rav was so proficient in mumin, v'shari mumi de lo yadi inshi, he would permit certain blemishes that others wouldn't have the insight to know is a distinct mum that is permitted. For Amri, and then people would end up saying, Ki agav nashar Rav, like a similar case Rav permitted, atula mishri mumover, and then he would end up permitting, other people would end up permitting passing blemishes, which would be problematic. So because of Rebbe's tremendous level of bikiyut, of clarity on this issue, therefore Rebbe wouldn't actually give him smicha, give him authority to adjudicate those cases. Now, the Gemara refers back and says, by both of them, Rav and Rabba Bar Chana, Rebbe Chia asked Rebbe, Rav and Rav Bar Chana. Rebbe Chia asked Rebbe, Yoreh, and Rebbe said Yoreh. Could they judge a prohibitory law? And he said, yes, they could. So the Gemara doesn't understand why he needed to ask permission. Igamir, if they know Isser v'Heter, they know these laws, so Rishuta Lamalei Lemishkal, why did he need to ask permission for that? So the Gemara answers Mishum Maaseh Shaya, because of a story, whereas we'll see a student didn't say things clearly, so therefore when giving permission to do this, the Rebbe would make sure the students are clear. The Tanya, as the Braita illustrates, Pamachat, one time Alach Rebbe L'makom Echad, Rebbe went to a certain place. And he saw people mixing dough in vessels that were tameh. Now this would naturally cause tum'ah to the dough because water was the thing that had made the dough wet, making it susceptible to tum'ah, and the vessels were tameh. Amar lahem, so Rebbe said to them, I know in this place they're makbid, that even chulin, unconsecrated dough, shouldn't become tameh. Why are you mixing the dough when the vessels are tameh? So Amrullah said back, Talmid Echad Balakan, one student came here, and he paskin for us, Me bitzaim ein machshirin. Swamp water does not make dough susceptible to tum'ah. But the problem is, me beitzim darash lahu. That student had really said the produce, the liquid of eggs, doesn't make dough susceptible to tumah. The eno savur, and they thought maybe it's a that he had said swamp water. Nami baha, and they were supported in their mistake by a Mishnah Mesechet Para that they also made a mistake in, because the Mishnah there says me karmiyon or me piga, the waters that come from these two streams of water, psulin mipnei shehein me bitzaim. They're not allowed to be used for para aduma because they're stagnant waters, and you need flowing waters. Mayim chayim. So ve'inu savor, they assumed midilagabe chatat psili, just as by korban paraduma you're not allowed to use these waters. Obviously, it's not considered water, and it won't make something susceptible to tuma. But that's not true. Regarding paraduma, it has to be waters that are flowing, and that's stagnant. But regarding making something susceptible to tuma, any sort of water will make it susceptible, and therefore, even if it's stagnant, it will also be susceptible. And they made a mistake both in their understanding of that student and in the Mishnah. So Tana Ba'otasha, the Braita teaches at that time, Gazru, they made a decree, the Chachamim made a decree, Talmud al Yoreh, that a student cannot paskin, Eleim Kein Otel Reshut Merabo, in prohibitory law, unless he asks permission, and his Rebbe will make sure that he's clear about his psak, so that people don't make mistakes and have the wrong halacha. A related story, Tanchum Breid Rebbe Ami Ikla Chatar. This Tanchum, the son of Rabbi Ami, went to Chatar. Darashlu, he made a psak there. He said as follows: Mutter liltot chitin bepesach. You're allowed to soak wheat on Pesach when you're going to grind it right after, because it's not going to become an issue of chametz. Amrlo, so the people that are said, Lav Rabbi Mani de Mitzur ikahacha. Is there not a fellow Rabbi Mani from Tzur in this area? The Tanya, we know that the Braita teaches Talmud al Yoreh alacha b'makom rabo. A student's not allowed to paskin alacha in the place of his Rebbe. It's disrespectful. Unless he's 3 parsa away, as we learned, was the Machane Yisrael in the Midbar, and everybody went to Moshe Rabbeinu. So Amar Lei, says Rabbi Tanchum said, Amar Lei said back to them, Lavadatoi, I didn't realize. The final story. Rabbi Chia saw a certain person who was standing in the cemetery. Amar Leis, Rabbi Chia said to him, are you not the son of a Kohen? Amar Leis, he said back, In What happened was, my father is a Kohen, but he went and married a Grusha, a divorced woman, making me a Halal, and therefore I'm not Asur in being in a Beit HaKfarot. But the point is, Rabbi Chia was able to, or initially went ahead and tried to stop him from being in the Beit HaKfarot, even though that seems to be paskening in the place of Rebbe. Nonetheless, he was allowed to prevent people from doing Yisurim. Turned out it wasn't an issue though. Moving on, Pshita, the Gemara says it's obvious, Lepalga, that an authorization in half, Haka Amr de Mahani, we know it's effective, like Rebbe gave Rav permission in one area, not in another, which was to permit Bechorot. Al Tanai Mahu Mai. But what about if it's Al Tanai? What if he says the Rebbe wants to give authorization to a judge for a short amount of time, for a certain amount of time? So Tashma, the Gemara says, let's learn a source from Rabbi Braita. The Amar Lei, Rabbi Yochanan, Rav Shemen. Rabbi Yochanan said to Rav Shemen, Arei ata b'shutenu ad shetavo etzleinu. You're going to Bavel. When you come back to Eretz Yisrael, until then you'll have permission to adjudicate. So you see, he gave him permission for a short amount of time that is allowed. Moving on to the third section of the day now, Gufa. Amar Shmo, we said this earlier. If two people adjudicate a case of loans, it's effective. But it's called an insolent court. Rav Nachman was saying over this teaching of Shmuel, Rav asked Rav Nachman a kasha from a Tosefta, because the Tosefta says as follows. If you have two people who say, sorry, it's a Mishnah later, it's a Mishnah. Even if two people out of the three in a monetary case, they say the person's innocent, or two people say guilty, and one says, I don't know, Yosifu Adayanin, you have to add on another one to finalize the case. But says Rav Nachman, why is it not sufficient if two are enough? Why do you need to add on a third one? It must be two is not sufficient. Kashan Shmuel. So the Gemara answers, when they initially sat down to judge with three, you need to finish off with three. But when they initially sit down to judge with two, it's considered insolent, but it's nonetheless effective. Another question. Rabbi Shimon ben Gamliel Omer, this is the Tosefta. Rabbi Shimon ben Gamliel says, Adin bishlosha, judgment, and that generally has to be done with three people. Upshara, and compromises, bishnaim, could be done with two. V'yafeh koach pshara mikoach adin. And in this way, compromise has a greater power than judgment. When two people judge a case, so the litigants can back out against them because it's not effective. But if two people made a compromise between the other litigants, the two litigants, so the litigants are not allowed to retract. But what you see clearly is, Rav Shimon Gamliel says, a judgment is not meted out by two. Kashan Shmuel. Turning to Vav Amud Aleph, Maybe you'll say, granted, it's a machloket Tanaim. The Rabbanan argue with Shimon Gamliel, and Shmuel follows the Rabbanan. Shimon Gamliel hold that 2 is not sufficient. The Rabbanan hold it is b'diavad, and Shmuel follows the Rabbanan. The problem is, v'hamar Rabbi Avo, we had this earlier in the Masechta and Bet Amud Bet. Rabbi Avo said, Shnayim shedanu l'divrei hakol ein dineim din, that if 2 people adjudicate a case, it's not effective according to everyone, regardless of their position in regards to pshara of compromise. So the Gemara answers, Gavra karamit. You can't ask a question a man on a man. Meaning to say is, comes out, it's a machloket amoraim. According to Shmuel, there is a machloket Rabbanan or Shimon Gamliel, and they follow the Rabbanan. 2 would be sufficient. According to Rabbi Avo, there's no such debate, and therefore 2 people would not be sufficient according to all Tanaim. Gufa, let's quote this and now discuss this. If 2 people adjudicate a monetary case, Rabbi Avo says it's not effective. Is that true? But the kasha is, there's a Mishnah Masechet Bechorot that says, the Mishnah says there, if a hedyot, an ordinary judge, he judged as an individual case, and he made innocent the guilty or guilty the innocent, which means he judged wrong. Or he made pure, which was tameh, which was tahor, or tahor, which was tameh. And as Rashi explains, he did some sort of a physical action in terms of adjudicating his case, meaning, let's say he said, you're chayav money to him, he took the money and gave it to the other fellow. Masha sasoy, the Mishnah Bechorot says, it's effective. And this judge is responsible to pay from his house. So what do you see clearly? You see that even one judge, it would be considered set in stone, it's effective. Now granted, he has to pay back, but the bottom line is, it is effective. Yavo just said, if 2 people judge, it's not effective. What happened is that the litigants accepted him on them to adjudicate, and that's why it would be effective. Asks the Gemara, but if that's true, why is he responsible then to pay from his house? He should be off the hook. The Gemara answers the Amruleh, because the people will say to him, the litigants could say, Deyanta lanu din Torah, did you adjudicate based on the Torah? Meaning to say is, they'll say like this, look, we asked you to judge for us and judge properly. You made a mistake. We can't undo what you've done, so therefore the fellow who received the money can keep it. But the fellow who was ripped off, he'll claim money from you because you didn't judge al pi Torah. Amar of Safa the Rabbi Abba. So what was the mistake here exactly? If the judge made a mistake in something that's a mefurish Mishnah, a clear Mishnah, we know if somebody makes a mistake in a Mishnah, a judge makes such an error, the entire case is undone. So then we'd have to give back the money, the whole thing is undone. It must be the judge made a mistake in something that's a logical calculation. What is an example? There's some debate, machloket tanaim or amoraim. And it's not clear what the halacha is like one or the other. The sugyan de but the general judges in the world say like one of them. And this judge went and he followed the other shita. That's considered shikul adat, and now what ends up happening, as Rashi explains, is the fellow who received money will say, look, we accepted you and I'm allowed to keep my money now. The fellow who was ripped off could say, we said you should judge us al pi Torah, and you didn't, therefore you have to pay me back. Says the Gemara, Lema Kitanai. Let's assume that this is a machloket Tanaim, Shmuel and Rabbi Avo, if 2 is effective, because the Braita says, Bitzua b'shlosha, that when it comes to pshara, making a compromise, you need 3 judges. Divrei Rabbi Meir, that's words are Meir. Chachamim omrim pshara b'yachid, and the Chachamim say 1 is sufficient. So this would seem to be a machloket. That's the machloket Tanaim. How many do you need for pshara? Rabbi Meir says 3, Chachamim say 1. So Savru, in order to say that this is assumed machloket Tanaim, the machloket Shmuel and Rabbi Avo is like this. Savru, they thought, everybody agrees, as we're going to learn on the next Amud, that Mishpat Tzedakah compares pshara, compromise, to judgment. So what's the machloket between Rabbi Meir and Rabbanan? Demar Savar, Rabbi Meir holds din bishlosha, that judgment is meted out with 3 people, and therefore pshara is also with 3 people. Umar Savar and the Chachamim hold din bishnayim, that judgment is meted out with 2 people, and therefore you could also have 1 judge for pshara, it's sufficient as well. So it would come out then that Rabbi Meir would reflect the Amorah of Rabbi Avo, and the Chachamim would reflect Shmuel. Good. So the Gemara says, lo. No, that's not true. Everybody would agree you need 3 like Rabbi Avo. What is the machloket Reb Meir and the Chachamim? Reb Meir holds makshinam sharladin. We do compare compromise to judgment, so therefore you need 3 for compromise too. Umar Savar and the Chachamim, although makshinam sharladin, you don't compare them, and therefore although din requires 3, pshara only requires 1. Says the Gemara, le'emat tanai b'pshara. So as we're continuing now to discuss the next section, pshara. Let's assume now that when it comes to compromise, there's actually 3 positions. Demar Savar, Rabbi Meir holds b'shlosha, you need 3 judges. Umar Savar, Reb Shimon ben Gamliel in the previous Braita on the Tosefta on Hamud Bet would hold b'shnaim, you need 2. Umar Savar and the Chachamim hold b'yachid, you only need 1. Amar Rav Acha b'rit Rav Ika v'itim Rav Yirmiyah bar Shalmaya. He says that's not necessarily 3 opinions, because Manda Amar Trey, according to Reb Shimon ben Gamliel, afilu chad nami, even 1 would be sufficient as well. Haidika Amar Trey, the only reason he says 2, if you want 2 witnesses to testify about the outcome or the agreement of pshara, so it's logical, it's a good idea then to have 2 witnesses adjudicating the pshara so that there's 2 people to say that's what happened. The Isal Kadatach Tzricha Kinyan, sorry I skipped. Amar Rav Ashi, continues the Gemara, Amar Rav Ashi. Rav Ashi continues, Shma mina, we deduce from Rabbi Meir's position, pshara einat tzricha kinyan, that when it comes to a compromise, there doesn't have to be a physical action of acquisition that's done. The Isal Kadatach Tzricha Kinyan, because if you would need something, Lamanda Amar de tzricha tlata, Lamali, according to Rabbi Meir, why do you need 3 judges? Tiski betray v'liknib minei. You should be sufficient to have 2 judges and make a physical kinyan, because that certainly would be effective. But the Gemara says it must be the fact that you need 3 is because you don't need a kinyan, and therefore you need a chashivut, the significance of a beit din, which is why you need 3, but you don't need a kinyan. V'haraya from a mayor, you don't need a kinyan when it comes to pshara. But the Gemara paskins v'ilcheta pshara tzricha kinyan. Compromise does require a kinyan. And you do have to do some sort of a compromise, a kinyan when it comes to this type of arbitration. Tanu Rabbanan. Now this is really moving on to the final section of the day over here. We're going to have 4 shitot regarding the idea of making pshara. Tanu Rabbanan says the Braita, Kishem sha'adin b'shlosha, kach bitzua b'shlosha. So firstly, pshara requires 3 judges like Rabbi Meir. Turning to Vav Mabet. Nigmara din, when the judgment has been done. Rashi learns that means, as we'll see in the bottom of Vav Mabet, that means when they've meted out the judgment. They say you're innocent, you're guilty. So at that point, then you're not allowed to make a compromise anymore. The judges are prohibited to make a compromise after that point. Sarmash, Bankash, Siman. Now we already had the first opinion, which was until that point you could make a compromise, but when Nigmara din, when the verdict is meted out, you can no longer make a compromise. Now we have the second opinion, this Tosefta, which is Rabbi Lazar ben Nosha Rabbi Yossi Aglili Omer, Asur L'Ptzoa, you're not allowed to make a compromise from the time that the litigants came in front of you seeking judgment. And if you make a compromise after that point, you're considered a sinner. And if you bless the people who made this compromise, it's blaspheming Hashem. About this, the pasuk tells us in Tehillim, someone that makes a compromise and is blessed, it's considered blaspheming Hashem. It's as if to say, I know better than HaKadosh Baruch Hu because I'm not doing the din Torah, but I'm making a compromise based on my own logic. Don't be worried about the litigants. Let the ruling pierce the mountain, meaning let it be clear as is the din Torah. The pasuk says, Ki mishpat le'elokim hu, justice is for Hashem. Hashem's going to back you up. Like Moshe Rabbeinu used to do. He would also say, I'll meet it out as it's meant to be. But Aaron HaKohen, before they would come to the court, he would try to make a compromise. He'd try to make peace between people. The pasuk says, Torah temet hayta befiu. In Malachi, talking about Kohanim, which is Aaron HaKohen, it says the Torah of Emet was in his mouth. V'avla lo nimtza b'sfatav. There was no iniquity on his lips. B'shalom v'mishor alach iti. He went with me in peace and straightness. V'rabim eshiv me'avon. He removed many from sin. Now, tangentially, in the Tosefta, the Gemara gives a few more explanations of this verse that we explained before. Botzea berech ne'etz Hashem. Rabbi Eliezer Omer, Reish gazal sa'ah shel chitim v'tachana. Somebody stole a sa'ah of wheat and he ground it up. V'afam bake baked it. Vehevish menu chala, and he removed chala to give to the Kohen. Keitza mevarech, how could he make a bracha on that? Ein ze mevarech ala min ha'etz. That's considered blaspheming Hashem. Val zeh ne'emar, about this it says, ubotzea. Now in this context, we're saying he stole, a thief. Berech, and he blesses ne'etz Hashem. That's considered a blaspheme to Hashem. Rabbi Meir says a third idea. Meir Omer, lo ne'emar botzea keneged Yehuda. It's referring to a particular character in history, Yehuda. Shene'emar, like the pasuk tells us, Vayomer Yehuda lachav, Yehuda said to his brothers regarding Yosef, Ma betza kinaru et achinu. What gain do we have in killing our brother? Rather, we should sell him. But even though it looked like a virtuous thing, still it's considered negative, as Rashi says, because he should have said, let's return him to our father. Anybody that blesses Yehuda and says, look, he was so virtuous, that's considered blaspheming. About him it says, Ubotseya, Yehuda, that he said, Ma betza, berech, you bless him, ne'etz Hashem, that's a blaspheming Hashem. Okay, third opinion in the Tosefta regarding Pshara. Yoshua ben Korcha Omer, mitzvah libtzo. It's a mitzvah to make a pshara, a compromise, until the verdict has been reached. Shene'emar, like the pasuk tells us in Zechariah, emet u'mishpat shalom shiftu b'sharechem. So it says truth and justice of peace shall be judged in your gates. V'alov makom sheyesh mishpat in shalom. Now, logically, these are contradictory terminologies. U'makom sheyesh shalom in mishpat. Shalom implies compromise. Mishpat implies ikar din. So, ele'ezo mishpat sheyesh bo shalom. What is mishpat that has peace with it? Heveomer ze bitzua, that refers to compromise. V'chem b'David omer, like David it says, v'yi David oseh mishpat v'tzedakah. David used to make mishpat and tzedakah. V'alo kol makom sheyesh mishpat ein tzedakah. Tzedakah and mishpat. These are contradictory terminologies. Ele'ezu mishpat sheyesh bo tzedakah. What did David HaMelech do? Heveomer ze bitzua. Mishpat tzedakah means he would do a mishpat with righteous, with charity, which was compromise. Now back to the Tanakama. How does the Tanakama explain this verse by David HaMelech? Now the Tanakama here really means Rabbi Elazar ben Yosef Yosef he holds it's asur to make a pshara. So Atan the Tanakama, Danet Adin, he explains like this. That if you judge a court case, v'zikat zakai, and you make innocent the one who is innocent, v'chayev et chayav, and guilty the guilty party, v'ra'ash nitchayev ani b'mamon, and he saw that in doing so he made a poor man liable to pay money. V'shilem lo mitoch beito. So in order to make it up, the judge went and paid him back from his own house. This is an example of mishpat tzedakah. Mishpat lazeh, it's justice for the one who received the money he needed. It's tzedakah lazeh, but it's charity for the poor man. Mishpat lazeh shechzir lo mamon. So the one who needed to be paid back was paid back. It's tzedakah lazeh sheshilam lo mitoch beito. But it's considered tzedakah for the poor man because he received back his money. So he helped out the poor man that he got back what he needed. Rebbe didn't appreciate this pshat because it shouldn't have said for all of his nation, but it should have said David did it for the poor people. So Rebbe says no, the pshat in the pasuk is even though he didn't pay back the poor man, but it's still mishpat tzedakah. Why? Mishpat lazeh tzedakah lazeh. It's charity for the poor, for the person who had to pay back. Why? Mishpat lazeh. So it's mishpat for the one who received the money she'achzir lo mamono because he got his money back. It's tzedakah lazeh, but it's charity for the other because he removed the thievery from under his hand. Now the fourth shita in the Tosefta is Rabbi Shimon ben Menasya. Rabbi Shimon ben Menasya omer shnayim sheba'u lefanecha ledin. Two people came in front of you to be judged. Ad shelo tishma divrei, and before you heard their arguments. Or if you already heard their arguments, you don't know which way it's going, you could say them, go and make a compromise. But when you hear their arguments, and you know which way the case is going to go, and you can't tell them, go make a compromise, because the pasuk tells us in Mishlei, in order to release the water, means release the dispute, get rid of it, throw it out, put it out of court and make a compromise, it has to be in the beginning of the court case. And before the matter is revealed, the dispute is revealed, then you could abandon. Which means before it's revealed, you could abandon it. But once it's been revealed, you're not allowed to abandon and make up pshara. Continues the Tosefta in a similar note. Amar Shnayim Shebo, this is Rabbi Yoshua ben Lakish Omer. Rabbi Yoshua ben Lakish Omer. Shnayim Sheba Uladin Echad Rach ve'Echad Kashef. Two people came to court. One is easygoing and one is difficult. Before you heard their words, you don't know which way it's going. You could say to them, I'm not going to get involved with you. I don't want to deal with you because I don't want the guy who's rough to give me a hard time. But because this guy who you could make liable might bother you afterwards. But once you hear it, you know where the court case would lean. And you can't say to them, I'm not going to deal with you. Like the pasuk says, you can't be scared of any man. You can't fear him, you have to do as you're supposed to. Rabbi Yeshua ben Korcha said another pshat in that pasuk. If a student sitting in front of his mat is Rebbe, and he saw some sort of a merit for the poor man and liability for the rich man. How do we know it's not allowed to be quiet? Like it says, Lo taguru mipnei ish. He can't be scared of any man, referring to his Rebbe. He has to speak up. Rabbi Chanin omer, Lo tachnis divarecha mipnei ish. As Rabbi Chanin explains, don't withhold your words in front of your Rebbe. And similarly, the Tosefta finishes off, the witnesses should know they're testifying about Hashem, because the litigants are like Hashem in this sense. In front of who they're testifying, danin and who atid lipar mehen, and in the future, who's going to pay them back if they testify falsely? Like it says, the witnesses stand in front of Hashem. And also the judges need to know who they're judging, meaning they're judging HaKadosh Baruch Hu Kiviyachol. And who they're judging in front of, and who's going to pay them back. Like it says, Hashem stands in the judge's presence. Like it says by Yoshaphat, by Yomer, Ela Shoftim, he said to the judges, Re'u ma'atem osim, see what you're doing, ki lo la'adam tishpetu, because you're not judging man, ki la Hashem, but rather you're judging HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Shemi omar dayan, so a judge might say, Mali b'tzaraz, I don't want this pain. Talmud lomar, machem b'dvar mishpat, Hashem is with you in your heart, meaning He'll know what you're doing. Ein lo dayan alama she'inav ra'ot, you paskin based on how it seems to be in front of your eyes. As long as you have the right intention, it's going to be fine, you're not going to end up getting hit. That's the end of the Tosefta. Continues the Gemara. Heichi dami gemar din. Heichi dami gemar din. What is the example of gemar din? What is the example of conclusion of din? This is the Tanakama's opinion. The Tanakama held that if there's been a gemar din, the judges can no longer make a compromise. So what is that point in judgment? Hold on one second. My recording just ran out of time, so I'm going to have to do a second recording. Hey Chidami Gemardin, we're picking up the bottom of Vav Amud Bet. Ezat Hashem, we'll just finish off the review. So the Tosefta, the Gemara picks up and says, according to the Tanakama, we said once the Gemar Din's been reached, you can't make a pshara, a compromise. What is the example of Gemar Din? So Rav Yudah Marav, Ish ploni ata chayav, Ish ploni ata zakai. It's when the judges meet out and say you're innocent or you are guilty. So Amar Rav says, Halacha Rabbi Yeshua ben Korcha, the Halacha follows the third opinion that it's a mitzvah actually to make pshara. Eini, is that true? V'har Rav Huna talmidei de Rav Hava. Rav Huna was a student of Rav. Ki hava atu lekamei de Rav Huna. And when litigants would come in front of Rav Huna, Amar would say to them, Idina ba'itu, ipshara ba'itu. If you want, I'll judge you. If you want, I'll give you a compromise option. So clearly, it's not a mitzvah, because if it was, then he would offer a pshara. So the Gemara explains, no, my mitzvah nami to come Rabbi Yeshua ben Korcha. What did Rabbi Yeshua ben Korcha mean when he said there's a mitzvah to do pshara? Turning to Zion with Aleph, he meant mitzvah l'meimer lahu. It's a mitzvah to tell the litigants idina ba'itu ipshara ba'itu, to offer it as an option. Says the Gemara, but if that's true, Hainu Tanakama. Tanakama also holds until the verdict's been reached and it's been meted out, you could give it as an option. So what's the difference then between Rabbi Yeshua ben Korcha and Tanakama? Mitzvah. The debate is if it's a mitzvah. Rabbi Yeshua ben Korcha says our mitzvah. Rabbi Yeshua ben Korcha holds it's a mitzvah to offer this. Tanakama savar is shutr. Tanakama holds it's voluntary. The judges could offer it, but it's not a mitzvah. So asks the Gemara, if that's true, then Tanakama comes out, Hainu de Rabbi Shimon ben Menasya, the same as Rabbi Shimon ben Menasya. It's the fourth opinion. The difference would be when the judges have already heard the arguments of the litigants and you know which direction it's going. According to the Tanakama, they could still make a pshara. They have the option of doing that still, as long as they haven't yet meted out you're innocent and you're guilty. But according to Shimon ben Asya, they're no longer allowed to say make a compromise beyond that point when they already know which direction this case may go. We're going to stop here at the top of Zayin Amud Aleph. Baruch Hashem, we finished the Chazara from this past week, and B'ezrat Hashem will pick up tomorrow with Zayin Amud Aleph, continuing on in Masechet Sanhedrin. Everyone have a wonderful week.